There is something more dangerous than a ruthless king, a woman who loved him, because a king without mercy destroys his enemies. But a woman with a broken heart, she destroys everything, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because once love is betrayed, there is nothing left to protect. In the shadows of power, where loyalty is currency and betrayal is survival, one woman ruled without fear, not because she was stronger, but because she had already lost the one thing that could break her. Her name was Valeria Carrillo, and the men who once controlled empires would learn the hard way that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has nothing left to feel. Welcome to the mafia's obsession, where power, betrayal, and obsession collide in stories that will keep you thinking long after they end. If you love intense mafia storytelling filled with emotion, strategy, and unforgettable characters, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment before we begin, because this story is not about power. It's about what happens when love becomes the most dangerous weakness of all. Before she became feared, Valeria Carrillo was respected, not because of her name, but because of her mind. She understood power differently from the men around her. While they fought for territory, she studied structure. While they relied on fear, she built control. In Guadalajara, her presence was quiet, but absolute. She worked beside Amado Carrillo Fuentes, not as a subordinate, but as a strategist. Many believed she was simply close to power. They were wrong. She was shaping it. And beside her,
It's time.
was the one man she trusted, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes. He was calm, disciplined, reliable, everything power required, everything she believed in, and somewhere between strategy meetings and silent decisions. Trust became something more, not spoken, not displayed, but understood. And in their world, understanding was more dangerous than love. They never called it love. That would have made it weak. Instead, it existed in silence, in loyalty, in the way Vicente always stood slightly closer when tension rose, in the way Valeria trusted his judgment without question. In their world, that was enough. One night, overlooking the lights of Guadalajara, Vicente finally spoke what neither of them had said. If this world didn't exist, he began. Valeria didn't look at him. It does. A pause. Then he stepped closer. I would have chosen you anyway. That was the closest thing to a confession. Valeria's expression didn't change, but something inside her did, because for the first time, she allowed herself to believe something dangerous. That loyalty could be personal. That power didn't have to be lonely. That someone in this world could be hers. That belief would cost her everything. Betrayal never announces itself. It arrives quietly, like trust. The deal in Matamoros was supposed to be routine. A controlled exchange between Amado's network and a faction linked to Juan Garcia Abrego. Valeria had planned every detail, every route, every contingency. Nothing was left to chance, except one thing. Vicente. Halfway through the operation, everything collapsed. Ambush, gunfire, chaos. Men dropped before they understood what was happening. Valeria moved fast, calculated, controlled, until she saw something that didn't make sense. Vicente, standing still, not fighting, not reacting, watching. And in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't an ambush. It was a setup, and Vicente was part of it. Their eyes met across the chaos. Time slowed, not because of emotion, but because of realization. Valeria didn't panic. She didn't scream. She understood. "Why?" she asked. Even in the middle of gunfire, her voice was steady. Vicente didn't answer immediately. Then he said something that destroyed everything. "It was necessary." Necessary. Not regret, not apology, just justification. And in that moment, something inside Valeria broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. Because love doesn't die from betrayal. It dies from indifference. Valeria survived. Most didn't. By the time the shooting stopped, the ground was covered in bodies, and Vicente was gone. That night, something changed in Guadalajara. Not in the streets, not in the power structure, but at the top. Valeria Carrillo returned. Different. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look for answers. She made decisions. And the first one was simple. Find him. Not out of love, but because unfinished things did not exist in her world anymore. Perfect. Continuing seamlessly, same tone, deeper emotion, higher tension. Pain is loud at first, then it becomes quiet. Valeria Carrillo did not scream. She did not rage. She did not ask why again, because she already knew something worse than betrayal. She knew it was intentional. Back in Guadalajara, the city continued as if nothing had changed. Cars moved. Deals happened. Power shifted quietly in the background. But inside the Carrillo estate, everything had changed. Amado Carrillo Fuentes watched her carefully, not as a leader, but as someone measuring damage. "She was your responsibility," he said calmly. Valeria didn't look at him. "He was my mistake," she replied. That answer stayed in the room longer than expected, because it carried something unfamiliar. Not grief, finality. "What do you need?" Amado asked. Valeria finally turned. "Control." That was the moment Amado understood something dangerous. She wasn't recovering. She was transforming. Finding Vicente was not difficult. Finding his network was. Valeria didn't chase him emotionally. She dismantled him strategically. The first move came quietly. A shipment connected to Rafael Aguilar Guajardo disappeared overnight. No noise, no trace. By morning, 3 of Rafael's men were found tied inside a storage unit. Alive, but broken. When questioned, they gave one name. Vicente. That was enough. Valeria stood in the dim light of the interrogation room, listening without expression. "Where is he?" she asked. "He doesn't stay in one place," one of them said quickly. "He moves. He's building something new." That confirmed it. This wasn't survival. This was expansion. Valeria nodded once. "Good," she said, because expansion created exposure. She turned to her men. "Remove them." 3 shots followed. No hesitation, no second thought. Because now, she understood something clearly. Vicente had not just betrayed her. He had chosen war. Word spread quickly, not about the betrayal, about her response. Men across Guadalajara began adjusting. Because Valeria was no longer reacting, and she was executing. In a private room, Juan José Esparragosa Moreno reviewed the reports carefully. "She's faster than expected," he said. Across from him, one of his advisors frowned. "She's emotional. That will slow her." Juan José shook his head. "No." He tapped the table lightly. She removed emotion already. That made her dangerous, because emotional leaders make mistakes. But broken ones, they don't hesitate. Valeria didn't send warnings. She sent clarity. That night, a convoy tied to Oziel Cardenas Guillen was intercepted just outside the city. Clean, precise. No survivors. But one thing was left behind. A phone. Still recording. When Oziel received it, the video began immediately. Valeria stood in front of the camera. Calm. Composed. Unrecognizable from the woman he had heard about before. "This is not retaliation," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. "This is correction." A pause. "You aligned with the wrong man." The video ended. Oziel leaned back slowly, and for the first time, he didn't smile. By the end of the week, everything had changed. Valeria Carrillo was no longer seen as a strategist. She was now a force. Men who once ignored her now adjusted around her because she had done something rare. She had turned pain into structure and structure into power. Inside the estate, Amato watched her from a distance, not interfering, not guiding, because he understood something most didn't. She was no longer operating within his system. She was building her own. And systems like that don't share power. That night, Valeria stood alone overlooking Guadalajara. The same city that once felt controlled, predictable, structured. Now it felt different. Not because it changed, because she did. And in that silence, she made a decision. Not about Vicente, not about revenge, but about herself. She would never feel like that again. Not love, not trust, nothing. Because in her world now, emotion was the only weakness left. And she had already removed it. Perfect. Continuing seamlessly, deeper tension, more emotional damage, and stronger power shifts. Vicente Carrillo Fuentes did not hide. He moved. There's a difference. Hiding is fear. Moving is strategy. Since Matamoros, he had rebuilt faster than anyone expected. New alliances, new routes, new men who didn't ask questions, only followed orders. Because Vicente understood something most didn't. To defeat an empire, you don't attack its strength. You replace it. Inside a secured location far from Guadalajara, Vicente studied a map filled with shifting routes and new territories. Across from him stood a messenger. "Valeria is dismantling everything connected to you," the man said. Vicente didn't react. "How fast?" he asked. "Faster than expected." That answer made him pause, not out of fear, out of recognition. "She always was," he said quietly. There was no regret in his voice, but there was something else. Respect, because he knew exactly what she had become, and more importantly, what he had turned her into. Valeria didn't chase Vicente. She studied him, patterns, movements, decisions, and something didn't add up. This wasn't betrayal for power. It was too calculated, too early, too prepared. He had planned this long before Matamoros, which meant one thing. She wasn't the cause. She was collateral. That realization didn't break her. It clarified everything. Inside a dim strategy room, Amato stood across from her as reports filled the table. "He didn't react," she said. "To what?" Amato asked. "To pressure, to losses, to exposure." Amato narrowed his eyes slightly. "He's not defending." Valeria looked up. "He's executing a plan." That was the moment the war shifted again. Because now, this wasn't betrayal. This was intention. It took 3 days. 3 days of controlled violence. Interceptions, disappearances, interrogations, and finally, a name surfaced. Juan Garcia Abrego. Valeria stared at the report without expression. "That's not possible," one of her men said. "It is," she replied calmly, because now it made sense. The Matamoros deal, the timing, the structure. This wasn't Vicente acting alone. He was positioned, used, or worse, aligned. Amato stepped forward slightly. "If that's true," Valeria finished the sentence, "then this war is bigger than us. And bigger wars require different decisions. She didn't send men. She didn't send threats. She went herself. That alone made it dangerous." The meeting was set in a neutral location, an abandoned property just outside the city. Vicente arrived first. Of course he did. He always did. When Valeria walked in, nothing moved. No guards stepped forward. No weapons raised. Because this wasn't about power. This was personal. They stood across from each other, the same distance as before. But everything between them had changed. "You came alone," Vicente said. Valeria nodded. "So did you." Silence. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "Was any of it real?" For the first time, Vicente hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. Vicente looked at her for a long moment, not as an enemy, but as something he had already lost. "Yes," he said. That answer hit harder than betrayal, because it meant it wasn't fake, it was sacrificed. "Then why?" she asked. Her voice didn't shake, but something deeper did. Vicente stepped closer. "Because this world doesn't allow it," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." Valeria shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "You made a choice." And there it was. The truth. Not fate, not pressure. Choice. Vicente didn't deny it. "I chose survival," he said. Valeria's expression didn't change, but her eyes did. "Then understand this," she said quietly. "I'm choosing the end." Silence filled the space, because now there was nothing left between them. Not trust, not loyalty, not even memory, only outcome. And in that moment, the war became irreversible, perfect. Now we enter the emotional destruction phase. This is where power, betrayal, and love collide fully. War had already begun, but now it had direction. Valeria Carrillo didn't move like before. Before, she dismantled systems. Now, she targeted him. Every route Vicente touched began to collapse. Not slowly, not strategically, directly. A warehouse tied to his new network was wiped out overnight. A convoy disappeared before sunrise. 2 of his trusted men were found dead before noon. Not messages, not warnings, removals. Inside his safe location, Vicente stood over a table filled with reports. "She's not attacking the structure anymore," one of his men said nervously. Vicente nodded. "She's attacking me." And that changed everything. Because systems can be rebuilt, but when someone understands you, there is nowhere left to hide. Valeria had removed hesitation. That was her greatest weapon now. Amato watched it happen in silence, because even he recognized something dangerous. She was no longer reacting like someone betrayed. She was operating like someone who had already accepted loss. And people like that are unstoppable. Inside the strategy room, one of the captains spoke carefully. "We're eliminating too fast. This will create instability. Valeria didn't look at him. Instability for who? She asked. The man hesitated. For us. That made her turn, and when she did, the room shifted. Then you don't understand the objective, she said calmly. This is not about maintaining balance. A pause. It's about ending a problem. No one spoke after that, because now they understood. This wasn't war anymore. This was elimination. Even the strongest structures crack. Vicente learned that the hard way. One of his closest allies, someone she had trusted since the beginning of her new network, was taken. Not killed immediately, captured. That alone told him something. Valeria wanted information, which meant she was getting closer. By the time they found the body, it was already too late. Everything the man knew was gone with him. Vicente stood over the body in silence. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar, not fear, regret. Because now he understood something clearly. This wasn't just a war he started. This was something he created, and it was becoming something he could no longer control. Amado Carrillo Fuentes had remained neutral, watching, measuring, allowing. But even he had limits. When Valeria ordered the elimination of a route tied to one of his long-standing allies without consultation, that was the line. Inside the estate, Amado stood across from her. You're expanding beyond your lane, he said calmly. Valeria didn't react. There are no lanes anymore. That answer didn't sit well. This affects my structure, Amado continued. Valeria stepped closer. This affects my war. Silence, because now they were no longer aligned. You're letting emotion dictate scale, Amado said. That was a mistake. Valeria's eyes locked onto his. No, she said quietly. I removed emotion. That was worse, because now there was nothing left to restrain her. Everything changed that night. Not because of an attack, but because of a decision. Valeria received new information, a confirmed location. Vicente, alive, unprotected. For the first time since the war began, the opportunity was clean, simple, final. Inside the room, her men waited for the order. Say the word, one of them said. Valeria looked at the map, then closed her eyes briefly, not out of emotion, out of calculation. Because this was it, the end, the man who broke her, the man who chose against her, the man she once trusted more than anyone, now reduced to a target. She opened her eyes and gave the order. Prepare the strike. No hesitation, no doubt, no mercy. And in that moment, there are moments in war when everything becomes simple. No more strategy, no more layers, just one objective, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes. The location was confirmed twice. No movement, no heavy protection. Too perfect. But Valeria didn't question it, because she understood something deeper. Even if it was a trap, it didn't matter. She was going anyway. Set the perimeter, she ordered. Her men moved immediately, because this wasn't just another operation. This was the end of something that had already died. Vicente didn't leave. That alone said everything. He knew she was coming, and still, he stayed. Inside the abandoned structure, he stood alone. No guards, no escape plan, just waiting. Because some endings are not avoided, they are faced. When the doors opened, Valeria stepped in first. Weapon steady, expression unreadable. The same woman, and yet completely different. You knew I'd come, she said. Vicente nodded. I was counting on it. Silence filled the room, not tension. History. "You could have run," Valeria said. Vicente exhaled slowly. "And spend the rest of my life being hunted by you?" A pause. No. That answer wasn't fear. It was understanding. "Why?" she asked again. This time, he answered fully. "Because the system was already collapsing," he said. Valeria didn't move. Amato's structure, it was too rigid, too predictable. Men were already preparing to turn. "That's not your decision to make." "No," Vicente agreed, "but it was my opportunity." There it was, the truth, not betrayal for survival, betrayal for power. And in that moment, whatever remained of her past with him disappeared. They stood facing each other, not as enemies, not as lovers, as consequences. "Was any of it real?" she asked again. Vicente didn't hesitate this time. Yes. That answer didn't hurt anymore, because now it didn't matter. Valeria nodded once. "Good." He frowned slightly. "That's all you have to say?" She raised her weapon. That's all that was left. And in that moment, everything they once were ended. The gunshot echoed. Vicente staggered back slightly, but didn't fall. Valeria's expression didn't change. She stepped closer. "You hesitated," he said weakly. That was true, just for a second. And in her world now, that was unacceptable. She fired again. This time, he dropped. Silence followed, heavy, final. Valeria stood over him, waiting, not for movement, but for something else. A feeling, something. But nothing came, because the truth was, the pain was already gone. And without pain, there was nothing left to release. The war ended quickly after that. Without Vicente, everything collapsed. His network disappeared. His alliances broke. His structure dissolved. Just like that. Valeria returned to Guadalajara, victorious, untouchable, feared, everything she was supposed to be. And yet, something was missing. Amado Carrillo Fuentes observed everything. The war, the transformation, the outcome. And he understood something clearly. Valeria had won, but not in the way people thought. She didn't just eliminate Vicente. She eliminated the version of herself that existed before him. And that was irreversible. Days passed, the city stabilized, power realigned, and Valeria Carrillo stood at the top. No challengers, no distractions, just control. But control without emotion is silence, and silence is lonely. One night, Amado approached her. "Was it worth it?" he asked. Valeria didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, there was no strategic response. "No," she said finally. That was the truth. Valeria stood alone overlooking Guadalajara. The same city, the same power, the same control, but she was not the same, because once she had something more than power, something more than control, something she believed in, and now it was gone, not taken, destroyed, by choice, by betrayal, by reality. And as the city moved beneath her, she understood something that no one else could see. She had become exactly what this world demanded. Untouchable, unbreakable, unfeeling. But in becoming that, she had lost the only thing that made any of it matter. And that is the true story of the mafia queen with a broken heart. And just like that, she won. Not just the war, but the silence that came after it. Because in the end, power didn't break her. Loved it. If you felt this story, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Mafia's Obsession, and drop a comment below. Was Valeria right to choose power, or should she have chosen love? Deepen Valeria's psychological state, introduce consequences of her rule, show lingering impact of Vicente, build a second emotional arc. End with a stronger, more haunting outro. Victory should feel loud. Celebration, power, recognition. But in Valeria Carrillo's world, victory felt like silence. The kind of silence that doesn't leave. Days after Vicente's death, the estate returned to order. Meetings resumed, roots stabilized, money flowed again. Everything worked, except her. She moved like before, spoke like before, decided like before. But something was missing, not emotion, presence. Because for the first time in her life, nothing inside her responded to anything outside. It started small. A thought. Not about Vicente, about the moment, the hesitation. That 1 second before she fired, she replayed it again, again, again. Not because she regretted killing him, but because she questioned something worse, why she hesitated at all. That question became a problem. Leaders don't need to show weakness. People feel it. Subtle changes began to surface. Delayed responses, slight misjudgments, unnecessary force. Not mistakes, but imbalance. Amado noticed first. She's no longer precise, he said quietly, because precision requires clarity, and clarity requires something human. Amado did not interfere. He observed, because he understood something important. You cannot fix someone who removed their own emotions. You can only wait and see what replaces them. Weeks later, a name surfaced, one no one expected. Pablo Acosta Villarreal, a former connection, old, strategic, dangerous, and more importantly, connected to Vicente's early movements. That changed everything. Because maybe Vicente wasn't the beginning. Valeria studied the file carefully. Pablo wasn't just a name. He was part of a network Vicente once operated within, which meant this war had deeper roots, and deeper roots meant unfinished business. This time, Valeria didn't rush. She planned. Slow, precise, cold. Because this war wasn't emotional, it was structural, and structure lasts longer than revenge. Through captured contacts and broken alliances, a truth surfaced. Vicente wasn't just ambitious. He was positioned, guided, by men like Pablo, which meant he didn't betray her alone. He was built into that decision. That realization did something unexpected. For the first time since his death, Valeria felt something. Not love, not pain, but anger. Not at him, at the system that shaped him. And that anger was dangerous because it meant something inside her still existed. It didn't come back fully, just fragments, memory, recognition, moments where she almost felt something, then stopped herself. Because now, feeling was risk, and she had already learned what that cost. Pablo didn't run, just like Vicente didn't, because men like that understand endings. When Valeria stood in front of him, there was no tension, only truth. "You built him," she said. Pablo nodded. "He chose." That answer mattered because it removed blame and left only responsibility. "Did he ever care?" she asked. Pablo looked at her carefully. "Yes." That answer didn't help because now she understood something worse. He cared. and still chose against her. Valeria raised her weapon, not out of anger, out of completion. This wasn't revenge, it was closure, and closure doesn't feel like anything. She fired, and just like that, the last piece of the past disappeared. Time passed. The empire grew stronger. Her control became absolute. No threats, no challenges, no equals, but also no connection. Because at the top, there was no one left. Valeria stood alone again, same city, same view, same silence, and finally, she understood everything. Power doesn't destroy you, it reveals what you chose to become. And she had chosen this. Every step, every decision, every loss. And now, there was no one left to blame, only something left to live with. And that was the real ending. Power had finally become simple. No rivals, no negotiations, no uncertainty. Everything in Guadalajara moved with quiet precision. I like a system that no longer needed to adjust itself. And at the center of it all stood Valeria Carrillo. She didn't command loudly. She didn't enforce visibly. She existed, and that was enough. Because when a system is perfectly aligned, it does not need reminders. It operates. From the outside, it looked flawless. Money flowed, roots stabilized, loyalty remained intact. But perfection has a flaw most people don't understand. It removes resistance, and without resistance, there is nothing left to sharpen you. Inside the estate, Valeria sat at the head of a long table, reviewing reports that required no correction. Every number was right. Every movement accounted for. Everything was exactly as it should be. And that was the problem. Because for the first time in her life, there was nothing left to fix. No threat to calculate. No decision to weigh. No tension to resolve. Just control. And control had become routine. She closed the file slowly, not because it required thought, but because something inside her felt absent. Not emotion. Absence. And that was far more dangerous. The city had never been quieter. Not peaceful, controlled. There's a difference. Peace comes from balance. Control comes from dominance. And Guadalajara belonged to dominance. Every decision, every movement, every outcome traced back to one source. Valeria. Men who once negotiated now complied. Men who once questioned now adjusted. Because under her rule, uncertainty had been removed. But so had something else. Flexibility. Inside a private meeting room, two senior figures spoke in low voices. "She doesn't hesitate anymore," one of them said. The other nodded slowly. That's exactly the problem. Hesitation is not weakness, it's reflection, and reflection allows correction. Without it, there is only execution, and execution, without reflection, eventually turns inward. Valeria had removed emotion completely, not suppressed it, not controlled it, removed it. That made her decisions faster, sharper, final, but it also made them unchangeable. Inside the strategy room, a minor adjustment was suggested, a small shift in one of the northern routes. "It reduces long-term risk," one of the advisors explained carefully. Valeria didn't even look up. No. The answer was immediate. No discussion, no reconsideration. Just outcome. The advisor stepped back, because in her world now, there was no space for debate. Only correctness, and correctness is a dangerous illusion. Because the moment you believe you cannot be wrong, you stop seeing what's changing. Amado Carrillo Fuentes had seen power like this before. Not often, but enough to recognize it. He stood across from Valeria one evening, watching her review another flawless report. "You've removed all resistance," he said. She didn't respond immediately. "Resistance slows systems," she replied calmly. Amado nodded slightly. "Yes." A pause. "But it also keeps them alive." That made her look at him. For the first time in days, she didn't have an immediate answer. Because what he said wasn't emotional, it was structural. And structure was something she respected. "You're suggesting weakness," she said. "No," Amado replied quietly. "I'm suggesting balance." Silence filled the space between them. Because balance requires something she had removed. Emotion. It didn't happen loudly. It never does. A single delay. One shipment that arrived later than expected. No explanation. No clear error. Just deviation. Valeria noticed immediately. Of course she did. Because in a perfect system, even the smallest imperfection stands out. "Who handled this?" she asked. A name was given. A man with no history of failure, no record of disobedience. That made it more interesting. Because this wasn't incompetence, it was choice. Valeria stood slowly. For the first time in days, something inside her moved. Not emotion, curiosity, and curiosity leads to discovery. She looked at the report again, then gave a single order. "Bring him in." Calm, controlled. But beneath it, something had shifted. Because perfection had just cracked. And once a perfect system cracks, it never returns the same. The man did not look like a threat. That was the first detail Valeria noticed. He stood in the center of the room, hands steady, posture controlled, eyes not fearful, but aware. Not defiant, not broken. Aware. That alone made him different. "What caused the delay?" Valeria asked. Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of calm that made people confess before they were even questioned. The man didn't rush his answer. "The route was compromised," he said. A pause. "I adjusted." Valeria studied him. "You adjusted without authorization." "Yes." No hesitation, no apology, just truth. That shifted something in the room, because men in this world do not speak like that, not in front of her. "Why?" she asked. The man met her eyes. "Because it was the right decision." Silence. Heavy. Because now, this wasn't disobedience, it was judgment. And judgment belongs only to power. Valeria didn't respond immediately, not because she needed time, but because she understood something important. This man wasn't wrong. That was the problem. She had already reviewed the situation. The route had been compromised. The delay had prevented a larger loss, which meant his decision was correct. But correctness, without permission, is still a threat. "Do you understand your position?" she asked. "Yes." "And yet you still chose to act." "Yes." No fear, no regret, just clarity. That was dangerous, because systems like hers do not fail from incompetence. They fail from individuals who begin to think for themselves. Everyone in the room knew what should happen. The rule was clear. No deviation, no independence, no exceptions. That was what kept the structure intact. But this time, something was different. Valeria looked at the man again, then at the report, then back at him. "You made the correct decision," she said. The room shifted, because no one expected that. The man didn't react. He simply waited. because he understood something deeper. This wasn't approval. This was evaluation. Valeria stepped closer. And that is exactly why you are a problem. The words landed with precision, because now everyone understood. It wasn't about the action. It was about what it represented. For the first time since her transformation, Valeria hesitated, not visibly, not long, but internally, because this situation had no clean outcome. If she removed him, she punished correctness. If she allowed him, she encouraged independence. Both outcomes were dangerous. And that was new. Because for the first time in a long time, there was no perfect decision, and perfection was the foundation of her control. Valeria made her decision, not based on emotion, not based on rules, based on something she hadn't used in a long time: judgment. "You will continue operating," she said. The room froze. "But not alone." She turned to her men. "He reports directly to me now." That changed everything, because instead of eliminating the problem, she absorbed it, controlled it, redefined it. The man nodded once, not grateful, not relieved, just aligned. And as he was escorted out, Amato, who had been watching quietly, spoke. "You didn't remove the threat." Valeria didn't look at him. "No," she said. "I evolved the system." That answer carried something dangerous, because for the first time, she wasn't maintaining control. She was changing it, and change, inside a perfect structure, is where collapse begins. Change does not announce itself. It appears quietly, then reshapes everything. After the decision to keep the man alive, something subtle shifted inside Valeria's empire. Not immediately, not visibly, but structurally. For the first time in months, a new variable existed inside her system: independent judgment. And even though it was controlled, it had been allowed. That alone was enough. Inside the strategy room, reports began to look slightly different. More suggestions, more observations, more thinking. Men were no longer just executing orders. They were anticipating them, adapting. And that adaptation created something unfamiliar: flexibility. Amado noticed it first. "She changed the rules," he said quietly. Valeria didn't respond, because she knew the question wasn't whether the system changed. The question was what it would become. Uncertainty had been removed from Valeria's world, completely. And now it was returning, not as chaos, but as possibility. Inside her mind, something began to shift. She started questioning outcomes, reevaluating decisions, allowing alternatives. That was new and dangerous, because certainty creates control, but uncertainty creates awareness. That night, standing alone by the window overlooking Guadalajara, she realized something she had been avoiding. She was thinking again, not calculating, thinking. And thinking requires something she had buried: feeling. It came without warning, not during a meeting, not during a decision, but in silence. The memory, not of the betrayal, not of the war, but of the moment before everything changed. Vicente standing beside her, the city beneath them, that quiet understanding, that belief. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't shut it down immediately. She let it stay, just for a second. And that second changed everything, because it reminded her of something she had erased. Not weakness, humanity. By morning, Valeria understood the truth, not about Vicente, about herself. She had not become stronger. She had become emptier. And that emptiness was not power, it was absence. She stood in front of the mirror, looking at someone she no longer recognized, not because she had changed, but because she had removed too much. Power, control, dominance. They were all still there. But something essential was missing, and for the first time, she didn't ignore it. The city still belonged to her. Nothing had changed externally. The empire remained intact. Her control remained absolute. Her name still carried weight, but internally, everything was different. Because now, she understood the cost, not of betrayal, of survival. She had survived everything, but survival came with a price. She had removed pain, removed love, removed trust, and in doing so, she removed meaning. That night, Valeria Carrillo stood at the window one last time, looking over Guadalajara, not as a ruler, but as someone finally aware. Power had not broken her. Love had not destroyed her. But her response to both had changed her completely. And now, she had a choice, not between power and weakness, but between emptiness and something real. She closed her eyes briefly, not in pain, not in regret, but in understanding. Because for the first time, she didn't choose control. She chose awareness, and sometimes that is the hardest choice of all. A woman who didn't fall, didn't fail, didn't lose, but still paid the highest price. Because in the end, power doesn't destroy you. It reveals what you're willing to lose to keep it. If this story stayed with you, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Mafia's Obsession, and drop a comment below. Would you choose control, even if it meant losing yourself? Because here, we don't just tell stories, we show you what they cost. Because here on the Mafia's Obsession, the most dangerous stories are the ones that feel real. See you in the next one.